Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a powerful story that will make you rethink everything you know about faith, prayer, and the unseen forces that shape our world. This is the story of Eleanor Sanders, a devoted wife, mother, and skeptical believer who never quite understood the true power of prayer until a near-death experience revealed the extraordinary truth about how it works. Ellie's life in a quiet town in rural Pennsylvania was predictable. Raising her daughter, Lila, working part-time at a local bookstore, and joining her best friend, Grace, for coffee every Friday. Though she attended church with her husband, Michael, her faith felt more like a routine than a conviction. Ellie often questioned whether prayer did anything at all, a doubt she kept to herself to avoid upsetting her community, especially Mrs. Foster, her neighbor and leader of the church's prayer circle. But one ordinary day, everything changed. A sudden health crisis led Ellie to the brink of death, and what she saw in that moment transformed her beliefs forever. Stick around to discover how this incredible journey unfolded and what Ellie learned about the miraculous power of prayer. If you're excited for this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. My name is Eleanor Sanders, but most people just call me Ellie. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania where life is slow and predictable. I've always considered myself practical, maybe too practical. Faith was something I respected but never fully embraced. I prayed out of habit, not expectation, and I never really believed it made a difference. But what happened to me changed all of that in ways I never thought possible. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I had just dropped Lila off at school and was heading to the grocery store when I felt a sharp, radiating pain in my chest. It wasn't like anything I'd felt before. My vision blurred, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I barely managed to pull over and call 911 before everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Dr. Emily Clark explained that I had suffered a cardiac arrest. I should have died. In fact, they said I did. My heart stopped for over 4 minutes before they revived me. But while my body lay on that hospital bed, something incredible happened. I found myself in a place of overwhelming light. It wasn't blinding, though. It was warm, gentle, and enveloping, like stepping into a sunrise that filled my entire being with peace. I could feel love surrounding me, as if it were a tangible force. But then I noticed something else. Threads of light were stretching out from me in every direction, connecting to others, some far away, some close by. These threads vibrated with a hum like music, and as I focused on them, I realized they represented prayers. Some were faint, like whispers. Others were strong, almost glowing. I could feel the energy behind each thread, the sincerity, the desperation, the hope. And then, like a movie playing out before me, I saw the prayers people had offered for me. Michael crying out to God in the waiting room. Mrs. Foster gathering the prayer circle at church. Grace holding Lila and whispering prayers of her own. I could see how each prayer was weaving into my reality, pushing back the darkness that had tried to claim me. It was as though every word spoken in faith had the power to shift the balance between life and death. But what truly stunned me was when I saw a prayer I hadn't even known about. It was from a woman I'd met only once, a stranger whose name I didn't even know. I had helped her carry groceries to her car weeks before. Her prayer for me was simple but heartfelt. Lord, bless that kind woman who helped me today. Even that tiny passing moment of kindness had sent ripples into this tapestry of light. When I returned to my body, gasping for air as the doctors revived me, I felt overwhelmed. What had I just witnessed? How could I explain it to anyone? Lying in that hospital bed, I kept replaying the vision in my mind. I had always thought of prayer as a passive act, something people did because they didn't know what else to do. But now I realized it was the opposite. Prayer was action. It was powerful. It was real. For days I wrestled with what I had seen. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a hallucination, the product of a dying brain. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It had been too vivid, too specific. I had felt the prayers working, shaping my reality in a way I couldn't deny. I wanted to tell Michael, Grace, even Mrs. Foster, but fear held me back. What if they thought I was crazy? What if I was crazy? The experience had shaken me to my core, and I wasn't sure I could even put it into words. All I knew was that my life could never go back to the way it was before. Back at home, life seemed unchanged on the surface, but inside I was a whirlwind of emotions. I couldn't look at my family the same way, knowing the invisible threads of their prayers had played a part in saving me. Michael was the first person I tried to talk to about it. It was late, the house was quiet, and we were sitting in the living room. I said, "Michael, when I was in the hospital, I saw something. I don't even know how to explain it." He put his hand on mine and said, "Ellie, you don't have to talk about it if you're not ready." But I could see the concern in his eyes. "No," I said, "I need to. I saw prayers, Michael. I saw them like threads of light. Yours were there, strong and bright. They pulled me back." He looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Threads of light, Ellie, are you sure it wasn't, the medication or the trauma?" I shook my head. "No, it wasn't like a dream or something I imagined. It was real. I could feel it. I saw you praying for me in the hospital, crying out to God, and I saw Mrs. Foster and Grace, even strangers I didn't know." Michael sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "I did pray, Ellie, harder than I ever have in my life. But it's a lot to take in." His skepticism stung, but I understood it. I would have doubted too if I hadn't seen it myself. The next day, Grace came over to check on me, bringing her usual basket of muffins and her calming presence. As we sat in the kitchen, sipping tea, I decided to confide in her. "Grace, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to laugh." She tilted her head and smiled. "Ellie, when have I ever laughed at you?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. Her reaction was different from Michael's. She listened, nodding, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Ellie," she said softly, "that's beautiful. It makes so much sense, doesn't it? How prayer connects us, even when we don't realize it. I've always believed it worked, but you saw it. That's incredible." Her acceptance was like a balm to my soul. But even with Grace's support, I felt a growing tension in myself. I couldn't shake the sense of responsibility the vision had left me with. If prayer was so powerful, why hadn't I taken it seriously before? How many opportunities to change lives had I missed because of my doubt? As the days went by, I noticed subtle changes in how I saw the world. I started to hear the words people prayed with new ears, like when Mrs. Foster spoke at church. Her prayers were no longer just words to me. They were intentions, energy, threads weaving into something greater. One evening, Mrs. Foster invited me to the weekly prayer circle. I had always avoided these gatherings in the past, making excuses about being too busy or too tired, but now I couldn't say no. Sitting in that circle of women holding hands, I felt something stir deep inside me. As each woman prayed aloud, I could almost feel the threads stretching out into the unseen, their vibrations creating ripples I couldn't yet understand. When it was my turn to pray, I hesitated. My words felt clumsy, inadequate. "Lord," I said finally, "thank you for showing me that this matters, that what we do here matters." Afterward, Mrs. Foster squeezed my hand. "Ellie, I could feel something different in you tonight. It's like your faith is waking up." Her words stayed with me, but they also terrified me. I wasn't sure I was ready for this new reality. Believing in the power of prayer meant taking responsibility for how I lived and thought. It meant no more hiding behind doubt. And deep down, I feared what people might think if I told them the full truth of what I'd seen. A few weeks after the prayer circle, life settled into a fragile routine. On the surface, things seemed normal, but my mind was anything but. I still replayed my near-death experience constantly, trying to make sense of it all. I wanted clarity, a sign that what I'd seen wasn't just a fluke or a fleeting vision. And then, one quiet evening, I got my answer in the most unexpected way. Michael and I had just put Lila to bed. I was tidying up the kitchen when I heard Michael call out from the living room. "Ellie, come here. You have to see this." I walked in to find him staring at his phone, his face a mixture of shock and awe. "What is it?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "It's Irene Foster," he said, holding up his phone. "She's been in an accident." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Irene, our neighbor, the prayer circle leader, the woman who had prayed so fervently for me during my own crisis, was now in critical condition. "She was hit by a car while walking home from church," Michael explained, scrolling through the local news article. "They're asking for prayers." My first instinct was disbelief. How could this happen to Irene, of all people? She was the strongest person I knew, the one who believed so deeply in the power of prayer. If anyone should be protected, it was her. But as I sat down and processed the news, a strange sense of urgency filled me. I felt compelled to do something, not just pray, but to really intercede for her in a way I'd never done before. That night, I found myself alone in the living room, on my knees. For the first time in my life, I prayed with every fiber of my being. Lord, I said, tears streaming down my face, I've seen what prayer can do. I know it can change reality. Please, let her feel the power of our prayers. Let her come back to us. As I prayed, I felt the same warmth I had experienced during my near-death experience. It started as a small glow in my chest, then spread outward, as if the very threads of light I had seen before were wrapping around me. I couldn't explain it, but I knew in that moment that something was happening. The next morning, I called Grace. "Did you hear about Irene?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Yes," she said. "It's awful. But Ellie, you won't believe this. Last night during the prayer circle, we felt something powerful. It was like God's presence was right there with us. I've never felt anything like it." I hadn't told Grace about my prayer the night before, but hearing her words confirmed what I already suspected. Something had shifted. Later that day, I visited the hospital to see Irene. Her family was gathered in the waiting room, their faces etched with worry. I hesitated at the door, unsure if I should go in. Then one of her sons, Andrew, noticed me. "Mrs. Sanders," he said, his voice soft. "Thank you for coming." "How is she?" I asked. He shook his head. "The doctors aren't sure. She hasn't woken up yet. But something strange happened last night. Her vitals, they stabilized out of nowhere. The doctors can't explain it." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Was it possible? After a few minutes of small talk, I asked if I could sit with Irene for a while. They nodded, and I stepped into her room. She looked so fragile lying there, hooked up to machines. I sat down beside her and took her hand. "Irene," I whispered, "it's me, Ellie. I'm praying for you, just like you prayed for me. You showed me what faith looks like. Now it's my turn." As I sat there, I felt the same warmth I had experienced during my near-death experience. It was as if the threads of light were weaving themselves around Irene now, too. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally stood to leave, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't a certainty that she would wake up, but rather an unshakable assurance that my prayers had been heard. 2 days later, Irene woke up. The news spread quickly through the community. Everyone called it a miracle, and maybe it was, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was proof of what I had seen, proof that prayer truly does change reality. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but wonder, why had I been given this experience? What was I supposed to do with it? The threads of light had connected me to Irene, just as they had connected others to me. I realized that my journey wasn't just about understanding prayer. It was about becoming a part of something much bigger. When Irene woke up, it felt like a collective weight had been lifted from the community. Her recovery was slow, but her resilience was undeniable. Within days, she was able to talk, though weakly, and she wasted no time thanking everyone who had prayed for her. I visited her again in the hospital a week after her awakening. She smiled at me from her bed, her voice soft but steady. "Ellie, I've heard you've been praying hard these days. I always knew you had it in you." Her words brought a lump to my throat. I wasn't sure how much to tell her. Could I explain what I'd seen? Would she even believe me? "Irene," I began hesitantly, "when I prayed for you, I felt something. It wasn't just words. It was like I could see the prayers working, wrapping around you, pulling you back." Her eyes glistened with understanding. "Ellie, that's no surprise to me. I've always said prayer is the most powerful force we have. You're just starting to see it for yourself." Her validation gave me courage, but it also made me realize how much my new perspective was separating me from those who didn't share it. Starting with Michael. At home, Michael was supportive in his way, but I could sense his unease. When I brought up Irene's recovery, he would nod politely but change the subject quickly. One evening, as we were washing dishes together, I decided to confront him. "Michael," I said, handing him a soapy plate, "I feel like we're not on the same page about what's been happening." He paused, drying the plate with slow, deliberate movements. "Ellie, I'm glad Irene is okay. I really am. But I think you're reading too much into all of this." His words stung, but I tried to stay calm. "How can you say that after everything we've been through? After what I saw?" He sighed. "Ellie, I don't doubt that you had a powerful experience, but you were in a coma, under stress. The mind does strange things. I can't believe it the way you do." I turned away, blinking back tears. "You didn't see what I saw, Michael. You didn't feel it. I wish you could understand." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt a deep ache in my heart. Michael had always been my rock, my partner. But now it felt like we were drifting apart, separated by something neither of us fully understood. The tension wasn't limited to my marriage. At church, I started noticing subtle shifts in how people treated me. Some were curious, asking questions about my experience, while others seemed wary. Grace was my one constant, always listening without judgment. "I think God is calling you to something bigger, Ellie," she said one afternoon over tea. "Maybe that's why you had this experience, to share it, to help others see the power of prayer." Her words made sense, but they also terrified me. The thought of sharing my story publicly felt overwhelming. What if people thought I was crazy? What if Michael couldn't support me? And then there was Lila. My sweet, curious daughter had started asking questions I wasn't sure how to answer. "Mommy," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed, "why do you pray so much now? Are you scared of something?" Her question caught me off guard. I sat down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, honey, I'm not scared. I've learned that prayer is very powerful. It can help people in ways we don't always understand." She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Like magic?" I smiled. "Not like magic, more like love. When we pray, it's like sending love to someone who needs it. And love is the most powerful thing there is." Her face lit up with a smile, and she snuggled deeper into her blankets. "Can we pray for Mrs. Foster again tonight?" "Of course," I said, my heart swelling with both pride and uncertainty. As I knelt by her bedside, holding her small hands in mine, I realized how much my journey was affecting those around me. Some relationships were strengthening, others were straining, and I had no idea where it would all lead. But one thing was clear: my life was no longer my own. In the weeks following Irene's recovery, my life became a delicate balancing act. The certainty I had felt in the hospital, that prayer was not just powerful but essential, continued to grow, but so did the complications it brought into my life. Michael remained distant when it came to my newfound fervor. We still shared the everyday rhythm of family life, meal times, school drop-offs, quiet evenings on the couch, but there was an unspoken tension that we both avoided addressing. One evening I overheard him on the phone with his brother Adam, a staunch pragmatist. "I don't know what to do," Michael said, his voice low but tight. "Ellie's different now. She's obsessed. It's like she's not the same person anymore." The words stung, though I pretended not to hear them. Was that really how Michael saw me? As someone lost in a delusion? But it wasn't just Michael. The wider community, too, was beginning to react to my story in unexpected ways. Grace had convinced me to share a brief testimony during a midweek church service, and while some people applauded afterward, others seemed skeptical. "That was interesting," one woman said as we stood by the coffee table after the service. Her tone was polite, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Do you think maybe it was just a dream?" Another chimed in, her voice tinged with gentle condescension. "I mean, near-death experiences are often explained that way." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't angry. I understood their hesitation. But I also knew what I had experienced was real. It wasn't a dream. It was truth. Amid these challenges, a surprising new subplot began to unfold. Irene, still recovering but as spirited as ever, invited me to her house for tea. "Ellie," she said, setting down her teacup with a determined clink, "I've been thinking about your experience. You're not the first person to see things like this, you know. I think it's time you meet others who've been touched by God in similar ways." Her words piqued my curiosity. "Others?" she nodded. "There's a group I know, a small gathering of people who've had transformative spiritual experiences. We meet once a month to share stories, pray, and support each other." At first, I was hesitant. The idea of sharing my story with strangers felt daunting, but Irene's encouragement was infectious. "You'll find that you're not alone in this, Ellie," she said. And that's important. God didn't show you what he showed you just to keep it to yourself. The next meeting was held in a modest community center on the outskirts of town. I arrived with a mix of anticipation and nerves, clutching the notebook Irene had suggested I bring. The room was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds. A retired firefighter, a young woman with a newborn, a man in his 60s with a kind smile. They all greeted me warmly. As we went around the circle sharing our stories, I was struck by the common threads that connected us. Near-death experiences, visions, miraculous healings. When it was my turn to speak, my voice wavered at first. I had an experience, I began, glancing nervously at Irene, who gave me an encouraging nod. I saw what prayer does. I saw threads of light connecting people, healing them, transforming reality itself. It was like love made visible. As I spoke, the group listened intently, their faces reflecting empathy and understanding. When I finished, the man with the kind smile leaned forward. "Ellie," he said, "what you've seen is a gift, but it's also a responsibility. The question is, what will you do with it?" That question stayed with me long after the meeting ended. Meanwhile, at home, the tensions with Michael escalated. One evening, as we sat in the dimly lit living room, I finally broached the subject. "Michael, I feel like we're drifting apart. I need you to understand what this means to me." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ellie, I want to support you. I really do. But you're changing, and I'm scared. I don't know where this is taking us." His vulnerability caught me off guard. I reached for his hand. "I'm scared too," I admitted, "but I believe this is something I have to do. I've been given a glimpse of something extraordinary, and I can't just ignore it." We sat in silence, holding hands, the weight of unspoken fears hanging between us. At church, the skepticism continued, but so did the curiosity. People began approaching me after services, asking questions about prayer, about faith, about what I'd seen. It became clear that my story was planting seeds of both doubt and hope in others, and I couldn't control how those seeds would grow. The challenges were multiplying, at home, in the community, even within myself. But so too was my conviction that I was being called to something greater. The next few weeks brought both clarity and chaos. On one hand, the monthly group Irene had introduced me to became a sanctuary, a place where I could share openly without fear of judgment. On the other, the rest of my life seemed to be unraveling in ways I hadn't anticipated. Michael was growing more distant. He avoided conversations about prayer or my meetings, and his once steady patience seemed to fray at the edges. One evening, as I prepared for bed, he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Ellie, I need to ask you something," he began, his tone cautious but firm. "Of course," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Where is this all going?" He gestured vaguely. "These meetings, these stories you're sharing at church, it feels like you're becoming someone else. And I don't know if I fit into that version of your life." His words hit me like a blow to the chest. "Michael, you're my husband. You're my partner. Of course you fit." He shook his head. "Do I? Because I can't keep pretending I believe in this the way you do, and I feel like that's what you want from me." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I don't need you to believe everything I believe. I just need you to support me, to trust that what I'm doing matters." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I'm trying, Ellie. I really am. But it's hard when I feel like I'm losing the woman I married." We went to bed that night with a chasm of silence between us. The tension with Michael was painful, but it was nothing compared to what happened with my friend Margaret. She and I had always bonded over our shared love of gardening and our long talks about everything from recipes to raising kids. But when I mentioned my near-death experience to her, her response was unexpectedly cold. "Ellie," she said, her voice tinged with irritation, "you're starting to sound fanatical. This isn't like you." "Fanatical?" I echoed, stunned. "Yes," she said bluntly, "you've always been level-headed, practical, but now it's like you're obsessed with this prayer thing. I'm worried about you." Her words stung, not just because they were harsh, but because they echoed the doubts I sometimes had myself. Was I going too far? Was I losing touch with the person I'd been before? That night, I poured my heart out to Grace over the phone. "Am I becoming some kind of zealot?" I asked her, my voice cracking. "No, Ellie," she said firmly. "You're becoming someone who's seen the truth and can't ignore it. People don't always know how to react to that. It scares them. Her words brought me some comfort, but the weight of the situation lingered. At church, the reactions to my story continued to be mixed. One Sunday, after the service, a man named Frank approached me. He was one of the church elders, known for his conservative views. "Ellie," he said, his tone measured, "I've been hearing a lot about your experience. It's certainly intriguing. But I wonder if you've considered the possibility that these visions could be misleading. Not all spiritual encounters come from God, you know." His insinuation was clear. He thought my experience might be deceptive or even dangerous. I felt a flare of indignation but kept my tone calm. "Frank, I respect your perspective," I said, "but what I saw was pure light and love. It brought healing, not harm. I can't believe that something so transformative could come from anywhere but God." He nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced. "Just be cautious, Ellie. The devil has a way of disguising himself as an angel of light." As I drove home that afternoon, Frank's words gnawed at me. Could he be right? Could I have misinterpreted what I'd seen? That evening, I knelt in prayer, seeking clarity. "God, if this is truly your will, show me the way. Help me stay true to what you've revealed." The next morning, as I was folding laundry, Lila came bounding into the room. "Mommy, guess what?" she exclaimed, her face glowing with excitement. "What is it, sweetie?" "At school, we had a prayer circle for Mrs. Thomas. She's sick, and I told everyone that praying for her would help, just like you said." Her innocent words filled me with a mixture of pride and fear. I was shaping her faith, her understanding of the world, and the weight of that responsibility felt enormous. Later that week, at the group meeting, I shared my struggles. Irene, ever wise, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Ellie, you're walking a narrow path," she said. "It's not easy, and not everyone will understand, but the ones who matter will. Trust that." Her words stayed with me as I continued navigating the emotional minefield of my relationships. The night began quietly, as most evenings in our home did. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through mail while Lila worked on a school project nearby. Michael had taken the dog for a walk, a ritual he often used to clear his head. It was an ordinary moment, one of those mundane scenes that define daily life. But as I sifted through bills and grocery receipts, I suddenly felt a shift in the room, a subtle but undeniable sensation, as though the air itself had thickened. "Mommy?" Lila's voice cut through the stillness, trembling. I looked up and saw her staring at the corner of the room. Following her gaze, I saw nothing but shadows cast by the soft glow of the kitchen light. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "There's someone there," she whispered, her wide eyes brimming with fear. My heart skipped a beat. "Where?" She pointed. "In the corner. I don't see them anymore, but I felt them. They were looking at me." A shiver ran down my spine, and I instinctively pulled her close. I didn't want to frighten her further, so I kept my voice calm. "It's okay, Lila. Sometimes shadows can play tricks on our eyes." But I knew better. There was something there, or had been. That night, after putting Lila to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the dim glow of the fireplace. The encounter lingered in my mind, stirring an unease I couldn't shake. Was Lila's experience a random childhood fear, or was it connected to everything I'd been experiencing? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, vivid memory of the hospital. The threads of light I had seen connecting me to Irene, to the nurses, to Michael. I hadn't seen shadows then. I'd seen only light. What was this darkness now? I knelt by the couch, clasping my hands together. "God, please guide me," I prayed, my voice barely audible. "If there's something I need to understand, show me." The next day brought a surprising turn. As I was leaving church, Grace pulled me aside. "Ellie, there's someone you need to meet," she said, her expression both serious and excited. "His name is Pastor Andrew. He's a visiting minister who's experienced things, well, things like what you've described. He's hosting a seminar on spiritual warfare tonight. I think you should go." The phrase spiritual warfare sent a jolt through me. Until now, my journey had been about light, love, and healing. But Grace's words made me wonder if there was more to this than I'd realized, something darker I had yet to face. That evening, I arrived at the small church where Pastor Andrew was speaking. The room was filled with an eclectic mix of people, from teenagers in jeans to elderly women clutching worn Bibles. Pastor Andrew was a tall, commanding presence with a gentle demeanor. As he spoke, his words resonated deeply. Friends, we live in a world of both seen and unseen forces, he began. Prayer is our greatest weapon, but we must also be vigilant. Where there is light, there will also be shadows seeking to extinguish it. His words sent a chill through me. He spoke of encounters with darkness, of moments when faith was tested in the face of fear. When the seminar ended, I approached him hesitantly. Pastor Andrew, I began, my name is Ellie. I had an experience, an NDE, and since then I've felt different. I've seen light, but recently there's been something else, something darker. He studied me carefully, then nodded. Ellie, what you've experienced is a gift, but with that gift comes a responsibility. The closer you draw to God, the more the enemy will seek to distract or discourage you. Do you think that's what this is? I asked. A distraction? It could be, he said thoughtfully. But it's also possible that God is calling you to confront something that requires not just faith, but courage. His words stayed with me as I drove home. What was I being called to confront? At home, I found Michael waiting in the living room. Where were you? He asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes filled with curiosity. I told him about the seminar, about Pastor Andrew's message, and about the moment with Lila the night before. To my surprise, he didn't dismiss it. You really think there's something out there? He asked. I don't just think it, I said softly. I know it, and I think we need to be ready for whatever comes next. For the first time in weeks, Michael didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though beginning to understand. The days following the seminar were filled with a tension I couldn't quite shake. The unsettling feeling of something watching us, something dark, lingered in the back of my mind like an ominous cloud, never fully gone but always hovering just out of sight. And then, something strange began to happen. The people around me, those I had confided in about my experience, started to change too. Michael, although still distant, seemed to soften in his demeanor. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, he shared something unexpected. You know, he said, pushing his food around absent-mindedly, I've been thinking about your experience a lot. I can't explain it, but I don't think you're crazy, Ellie. I don't know what happened to you, but maybe there's something to all this. His admission caught me off guard, and I set my fork down, my heart racing. You believe me? He shrugged, a quiet vulnerability in his eyes. I don't know what to believe, but I see how much it's changed you, and I'm starting to wonder if maybe I should be open to it too. I don't want you to go through this alone. In that moment, I realized how far Michael had come. The man who had once dismissed my experience as a figment of my imagination was now willing to walk beside me in this unknown territory. But just as the gap between us seemed to close, another one appeared, this time with my mother. A few days after Michael's admission, I decided to visit her. I hadn't seen her much since the NDE, and I wanted to explain more about what had been happening to me. I was hopeful that, despite her skepticism, she would be understanding. But when I arrived at her house, I saw a different version of my mother. Her eyes were tired, her voice strained. Ellie, she began before I could even sit down. I've been hearing about these prayer meetings you've been attending, and I'm worried. This isn't like you, this whole spiritual thing. It's not who you are. You're losing yourself. Her words stung. Mom, I'm still me. No, she cut me off sharply. You're not the same. You've been brainwashed by this group. These people are taking advantage of you. I blinked, stunned by her harshness. They're not taking advantage of me. They've helped me heal, helped me understand things I didn't know before. But that's the problem, she insisted. This isn't just about faith anymore. It's become an obsession, and I don't like it. It's changing you. I want my daughter back. Her words felt like a punch to the stomach. I had expected her to be skeptical, but not like this, not with such fervor. I stood up abruptly, the tension in my chest rising. I'm still me, Mom. I'm just growing, and if you can't accept that, I don't know what else to say. I walked out of the house before she could respond. I could feel the distance between us growing, a distance I wasn't sure I could bridge. At the group meeting the following week, Irene could sense something had shifted. When I shared what had happened with my mother, she offered a knowing smile. Ellie, she said gently, sometimes the ones closest to us have the hardest time understanding our transformation. But you have to remember, you're not just changing for yourself. You're changing because God has revealed something to you that's bigger than any of us. I nodded, but the weight of my mother's words continued to hang over me. It was hard to shake the feeling that I was losing something: my family, my old life, my sense of normalcy. Then there was Grace, who had become my spiritual rock in so many ways. She continued to support me unconditionally, but lately I noticed a shift in her as well. She had always been the one to remind me to trust in the process, to lean into God's will, but now there were times when she seemed uncertain. One afternoon we met for coffee at the small cafe near the church. As we sat down, she hesitated before speaking. "Ellie, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice low. "Are you sure you're hearing from God? I mean, do you ever doubt?" Her question took me by surprise. Of course I doubt. I'm human, but I know what I experienced. I know what I saw, and I know what I feel now. She took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I'm just worried you're pushing too hard, too fast. People are changing, and sometimes that can make us lose sight of the truth we knew. Are you sure you're staying grounded?" Her concern echoed the very thoughts that had been plaguing me in the quiet moments of doubt. Was I pushing too hard? Was I losing myself in this journey? Later that night, I stood by the window in my living room, staring out at the dark sky. I was no longer sure of my own path. Everything had changed so quickly, and I couldn't help but feel like I was on the edge of something I wasn't ready for. But what choice did I have? I had seen the light. The truth had been revealed to me. How could I walk away from it now? But then, as I stood there, something unexpected happened. A soft knock at the door broke my thoughts. I opened it to find Michael standing there, his face serious, but his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a while: determination. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about everything, the prayer, the experiences, everything. And I think I understand now. It's not just your journey, it's ours. I'm ready to walk with you, Ellie, wherever this leads." In that moment, I realized that the journey ahead wasn't just mine anymore. It was one we would walk together. The weeks following Michael's decision to walk this path with me were a whirlwind. What had once been a personal struggle now felt like a shared experience, and for the first time since my near-death experience, I wasn't alone in my questioning. But despite Michael's support, I still couldn't shake the tension growing between me and the people closest to me. The world I had once known seemed to be drifting further out of reach, and I found myself questioning if the transformation I was undergoing was worth the price it was exacting. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Lila's voice broke through my thoughts. "Mom, there's someone at the door," she said, her tone uncertain. I walked to the door, expecting it to be a neighbor or a friend from the church. Instead, standing in front of me was my mother. She looked tired, as though the weight of the past few weeks had aged her prematurely. "Mom," I said, surprised but relieved to see her. "What are you doing here?" She hesitated, her eyes shifting nervously. "I've been thinking, a lot, and I know I've been hard on you, Ellie. I don't understand all of this, change, but I'm here because I want to try." Her words caught me off guard. For weeks it had felt like I was losing her, and now she was here, offering an olive branch. "I don't expect you to understand," I said softly, stepping aside to let her in. "But I need you to know that this is real. This change, this journey, it's not just a phase. It's part of who I am now." She nodded, though there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "I don't want to lose you, Ellie. I'm afraid that this, whatever it is, might take you further away from me, from us." We sat at the kitchen table, and I could sense the deep divide between us. There was a yearning in her eyes for the daughter she once knew, the one who had shared Sunday dinners, laughter, and uncomplicated moments. But the woman before her now was different, changed. "I'm still your daughter, Mom," I said, trying to reassure her. "But I've seen things. I've felt things that I can't ignore. I can't go back." The words felt heavy, and I could see the pain in her face as she grappled with the reality of what I was saying. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, expecting Michael or maybe even Grace, but instead I was met by Pastor Andrew. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the room as though he were searching for something. "Ellie, I need to talk to you, he said urgently. I ushered him inside, noting the tension in his voice. What's wrong, Pastor? There's something happening, he said, his tone low. We've been getting reports of disturbances, strange occurrences happening in the area, 5, and I have reason to believe it's connected to the spiritual shifts you've been experiencing. My heart raced. Disturbances? What kind of disturbances? Pastor Andrew paused, his eyes meeting mine with a weight of unspoken concern. People are seeing things, hearing things, sensing things that aren't there. Some of them are experiencing visions or nightmares, and I'm worried it's tied to the prayers you've been leading. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. My mind raced as I processed what he was saying. Was this the darkness I had sensed? The shadows that had been lurking at the edges of my perception? Was my journey and the prayers I'd been offering awakening something malevolent? Before I could respond, Michael walked into the room, having just returned from his walk with the dog. His eyes locked on Pastor Andrew's face, sensing the gravity of the conversation. What's going on? Michael asked. Pastor Andrew looked at him solemnly. There are spiritual forces at work that we're only beginning to understand, and Ellie's awakening, her NDE and subsequent prayers, might have attracted something dark, something that we can't see yet but can certainly feel. Michael's face drained of color. You're saying this is our fault? No, Pastor Andrew said quickly, his hands raised. This isn't about blame. It's about understanding the spiritual realities at play. Sometimes, when a person awakens to a deeper truth, the forces of darkness will try to undermine that. You've seen the light, Ellie, but you also need to be prepared for the shadows that come with it. I felt a chill settle in my chest. The darkness that had once seemed distant now felt very real. Pastor Andrew continued, I'm not here to scare you, Ellie, but I need you to be aware. The enemy doesn't give up easily. Your prayers, your journey, it has power, but so does what you're up against. And right now you have a choice to make. Choice? I asked, my voice trembling. You need to decide whether you're ready to confront whatever this is, he said, because it's coming for you, and it won't stop until it's either exposed or you've turned away. I felt my pulse quicken. The weight of his words settled over me, and I knew that whatever had started as a path towards spiritual awakening had now led me to a point of no return. In that moment, everything changed. The spiritual battle I had been unknowingly preparing for had just begun. I turned to Michael, his hand resting on Lila's shoulder as she sat quietly in the corner of the room, watching us. What do we do? I whispered. Michael squeezed my hand, his voice steady. We fight, together. The next few days felt like a blur of mounting pressure. The words Pastor Andrew had spoken echoed in my mind constantly. The enemy doesn't give up easily. At night, I would lie awake, listening for sounds that weren't there, waiting for some sign that the spiritual forces he'd warned me about were coming for me. I couldn't escape the weight of his words. The tension in our home was palpable, and each of us seemed to feel it in our own way. The most unsettling part was the absence of answers. Pastor Andrew had offered no clear guidance on how to fight whatever was coming. He had merely cautioned us to stay vigilant, to continue praying, and to prepare ourselves for whatever might arise. But the more I prayed, the more I felt a deeper sense of unease. The presence of something dark, something foreign to me, was growing stronger, lurking at the edges of my awareness. It was as if the prayers themselves were stirring something in the unseen world. One evening, after putting Lila to bed, Michael and I sat together in the living room, a silence stretching between us. The weight of the unknown hung in the air like thick smoke, and we both knew we couldn't avoid it any longer. Ellie, Michael said, breaking the silence, his voice low. Do you think we're in over our heads? I turned to him, my heart heavy. I don't know, Michael, but I can't back down now. The truth I've seen, it's too important. I know it's real, and I can't pretend like it didn't happen. I paused, searching for the right words. But the more I pray, the more I feel like I'm being pulled in two directions, like something is calling me, but I don't know if it's good or bad. Michael looked at me, his brow furrowed in concern. I've been feeling it too. It's like something's watching us, just waiting for the right moment to strike. But I won't let it tear us apart, Ellie. Whatever this is, we face it together. I reached for his hand, grateful for his strength, We had come so far together. He had embraced this journey with me in a way I never expected. But now, with this new threat looming, I wasn't sure if our bond would be enough to withstand what was coming. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was eerily quiet, but the air felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't understand. I rose from bed, drawn to the window, as if something beyond it was calling me. There was a sharp knock at the door. I flinched, my heart leaping in my chest. Who could it be at this hour? I opened the door cautiously, only to find Pastor Andrew standing there, his face grim. "I need to talk to you," he said urgently, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "What's going on?" I asked, feeling a sudden surge of dread. Something was different. His presence felt more urgent, more desperate. "There's been a breakthrough," Pastor Andrew said. "I've been praying for guidance, and God has shown me something." His voice was low, almost reverent. "The force that's threatening you, Ellie, it's not just a shadow, it's a spirit, a fallen one that has been following you ever since your near-death experience." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "A fallen spirit?" "Yes," he nodded, his eyes locking with mine. "This entity has been waiting for someone like you, someone who has unlocked a higher level of spiritual awareness. Your prayers, your awakening, it's called it out. And now it's coming for you, Ellie. It wants to claim you." I felt my world tilt. The very thing I had feared, the thing that had been lurking just beyond my perception, was real. The truth I had sought had come at a price, and I was only now beginning to understand the depth of that cost. "What do we do?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "We fight," Pastor Andrew said, his voice firm. "But this is no ordinary fight. This isn't something we can confront with just prayer or good intentions. We need to prepare ourselves spiritually, to strengthen our faith, and to make a choice, to stand firm or to give in. This spirit will not relent until it has you, Ellie, but if you remain steadfast, if you trust in God's protection, it will lose its power." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm ready," I said, though I wasn't sure if I truly was. "But I can't do this alone. Michael and Lila, my family, they're in danger too." Pastor Andrew nodded gravely. "We will all need to stand together. It's the only way." The next day, I gathered my family in the living room. Michael, Lila, and my mother sat across from me, their faces a mix of concern and uncertainty. I could see the fear in their eyes, but also a flicker of something else, resolve. "Listen," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "There's something I need to tell you all. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us." Michael reached for my hand, his grip firm. "What's going on, Ellie?" I took a deep breath. "Pastor Andrew came to see me last night. He told me that the spirit I've been feeling is real. It's been following me since my NDE, and now it's come to claim me." I paused, my gaze sweeping across the room. "We have to stand together. This isn't something I can fight on my own." My mother's face paled, but she nodded slowly. "I don't understand it, Ellie, but I will stand by you, whatever it takes." I turned to Michael. "I need you with me. You've been the one constant through all of this. I need your strength now more than ever." He squeezed my hand, his voice filled with determination. "We're in this together, Ellie. We face whatever comes side by side." The room was quiet for a moment as we all came to the same unspoken decision. We would fight this battle together. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The final confrontation was coming, and I could feel it drawing near, like a storm on the horizon. The spiritual battle for my soul and my family was about to reach its peak. The days following our decision to face the spirit head-on were filled with tension. Our home, once a sanctuary of comfort, now felt like a battlefield. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside seemed amplified, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I couldn't escape the gnawing sensation that something was lurking just beyond my sight, waiting for the moment to strike. Pastor Andrew's warnings had been clear. This spirit wouldn't attack until it had tested us, until it had seen if we were truly committed to the fight. And with each passing day, I felt the pressure building, as though the weight of the spiritual forces that surrounded us was slowly crushing me. The tension between Michael and me began to shift. The fear was no longer just about the unknown. It was about us. I had begun to feel a pull, a call, and while I knew deep down it was a test of my faith, I also feared what it might mean for our family. The call wasn't just spiritual, it was personal. It asked me to question everything I had ever known about myself, my faith, and my love for my family. Would I remain loyal to them, or would I answer this higher calling? Michael was the first to notice my change. The way I would get lost in thought, the way my prayers became more urgent and intense. He wasn't blind to the growing distance between us. "Ellie, talk to me," he said one evening, sitting beside me on the couch, his eyes filled with concern. "I know you're scared, but we need to be in this together. I can see you slipping away, and I don't know how to help you if you don't let me in." I didn't answer right away. How could I explain the spiritual struggle I was facing, the pull I felt to go deeper, to answer the call that I wasn't sure was from God or from something darker? How could I explain the confusion that gnawed at me every night? "I don't know how to fight this, Michael," I finally whispered, my voice breaking. "It's like I'm being torn apart. On one hand, I know this is the truth, but on the other, I feel this darkness creeping in, like I'm about to lose everything." His eyes softened, and he reached out, placing his hand gently on mine. "We're not losing anything, Ellie. We're finding the truth. You don't have to carry this alone. I'm here with you, always, and I know that you're strong enough to face whatever this is." The sincerity in his words felt like a lifeline, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. I had seen enough in my visions, enough in my prayers, to know that the moment of reckoning was drawing near. And when it came, there would be no turning back. Later that night, after Michael had gone to bed, I stood by the window, staring into the dark night. The winds had picked up, and I could hear the trees rustling as if they were speaking in hushed tones. I closed my eyes, focusing on the steady rhythm of my breath, praying for clarity. My heart was heavy with doubt, but I knew I had to keep going. It was then that I felt it, the pull. Stronger than before. A presence, a force that seemed to draw me forward, like an invisible thread connecting me to something beyond this world. My mind screamed to resist, to stay grounded, but my body moved as if it had a mind of its own. Suddenly, I was outside, standing in the cool night air. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the garden. I could hear a faint whisper, almost too soft to be real, like someone calling my name. I turned, expecting to see Michael, but there was no one there. Only the wind and the unsettling silence of the world around me. That's when I saw it. The shadow. At first, it was just a flicker out of the corner of my eye. But as I turned my head, it became clearer. A dark figure standing at the edge of the yard, barely visible against the blackness of the night. I couldn't make out any details, but the presence was undeniable. It was real, and it was watching me. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as fear and confusion spiraled inside me. Was this the spirit that had been following me? Was this the enemy that Pastor Andrew had warned me about? And if so, what was I supposed to do now? The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, as if waiting for me to make the next move. The air grew heavier, colder, and I felt a deep sense of dread in my bones. But then, through the fear, I remembered something important. I wasn't alone. Michael, Lila, my family, they were with me. I didn't have to face this in isolation, and neither did I have to fight it in my own strength. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and I began to pray. The words flowed from me in a rush, a desperate plea for help, for protection, for strength. My hands trembled, but I kept going, even as the shadows seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. As I prayed, I felt the connection to something higher, the presence of God, the divine energy that had been with me through every trial. And in that moment, everything shifted. The shadow seemed to waver, flickering like a candle flame in the wind. I could feel it retreating, pushed back by the power of my prayer. The fear, the darkness, it all began to lose its grip on me. I was not alone. I was never alone. The shadow vanished into the night, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The air became lighter, and I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. I stood there for a long time, breathing deeply, letting the calm settle in my heart. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I knew that I wasn't fighting it alone. I had my family, I had my faith, and I had the strength to face whatever came next. The days after my encounter with the shadow felt like a blur. I had a newfound sense of peace, but that peace was fragile, like holding a delicate glass figurine in your hands, knowing that one wrong move could shatter it. The tension between Michael and me had eased, but I knew we were both walking on eggshells, unsure of what the next moment would bring. I spent more time in prayer, seeking guidance, trying to discern what I was meant to do next. I was no longer questioning the truth I had experienced, but the path I was meant to walk. Was I truly prepared to stand firm in my faith, no matter the cost? Was I willing to risk everything, my family, my community, my whole identity, just to follow what I had learned from this experience? The pull to dive deeper into this spiritual awakening became impossible to ignore. I felt as if I were being called to share what I had witnessed, to help others understand the reality I had seen. But the fear of rejection from my community held me back. I had already begun to feel the isolation, but I wasn't ready to face it fully. Was it worth it? The cost of my faith could be more than I had bargained for. That night, Michael and I sat on the porch, the stars twinkling overhead, their brightness almost mocking in their stillness. The house was quiet, but the silence between us felt heavy. "I've been thinking," Michael began softly, breaking the stillness, "about what happened and about you." I turned to look at him, his face lit by the dim glow of the porch light. There was a question in his eyes, a question I knew would come, but one I wasn't sure I could answer. "What are you thinking?" I asked. His voice was hesitant, careful. "You've changed. I've seen it. You're not the same person you were before. You believe something now that you didn't before, and I can see how much it's pulling at you. But Ellie, are you sure this is the right path? Are you sure this is the truth?" I felt a lump form in my throat. My heart ached. I knew what he was asking. He wasn't just asking about the spirit or the experience. I could feel it. He was asking about us, about the future of our family. He was afraid that whatever path I was on would eventually take me away from him. "I don't know, Michael," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I don't know if this is the truth, but I know what I felt, I know what I saw, and I can't turn away from it, no matter how hard it gets." He was silent for a long time. The wind whispered through the trees, the only sound breaking the heavy quiet between us. Finally, Michael sighed, his hand reaching for mine. "I love you, Ellie. I don't understand everything that's happening to you, but I love you, and I'll be with you. Just don't lose yourself in all of this. I need you here." Tears filled my eyes as I squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered, but inside, the battle raged on. The pull of the spiritual truth I had discovered was overwhelming. How could I keep this hidden from the world, from the people who needed to hear it? How could I keep living a life of half-truths? It was at that moment, in the quiet comfort of Michael's love, that I knew what I had to do. I had to take the leap. I had to trust in the faith I had found, in the truths I had seen, and I had to share them with the world, even if it meant losing everything. The next day, I stood in front of the church, my heart pounding. The sanctuary was nearly empty, the pews filled with a handful of familiar faces. I had made the decision. I was going to speak. Pastor Andrew had offered me a platform, and I could feel the weight of it, the responsibility of telling my story to people who had known me as someone else. Would they understand? Would they accept me? As I took my place at the pulpit, the crowd grew silent. I could hear the sound of my heart in my ears, and my hands shook as I gripped the microphone. "My name is Ellie, and I have experienced something that has changed my life forever," I began, my voice cracking slightly. For the next hour, I shared my story, the visions, the near-death experience, the darkness that had sought to tear me away, and the light that had shown me the truth. I didn't hold back. I spoke with every ounce of conviction I had, sharing not just the events, but the transformation that had taken place in my soul. As I finished, there was a long pause, and for a moment I thought the world might crumble beneath my feet. But then, one by one, people began to speak. Some were skeptical, their faces hard with disbelief. Others, though, were moved. I saw tears in their eyes. I saw nods of recognition. The truth I had felt so deeply was resonating with others. Pastor Andrew was the first to stand. His eyes were filled with understanding, his hands clapping in slow, deliberate applause. "Thank you, Ellie," he said, his voice steady, "for having the courage to share your journey, for having the strength to stand by what you believe, no matter the cost." And in that moment, I felt it. The shift, the final release. I had made my choice. I had faced my fear. I had spoken the truth, and in doing so, I had stepped fully into the life I was meant to live. As I left the church that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. The fear of rejection had been replaced by a sense of peace, a feeling of alignment with something greater than myself. I had embraced my journey, not just for me, but for the others who might find themselves on a similar path. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. As I sit here now, reflecting on the journey I've traveled, I can hardly recognize the person I was when this all began. The woman who once clung so desperately to her old beliefs, to the familiar rhythms of her life, is no more. What remains is someone different. Someone who has been shaped by the very experiences I feared would destroy me. I have learned more about myself, about God, and about the power of faith than I could have ever imagined. The transformation wasn't easy. It wasn't something I could rush or force. There were nights when I lay awake, my mind wrestling with doubt, with fear, with the overwhelming weight of the truth I had discovered. But even in those darkest moments, I felt the steady hand of God guiding me, whispering in my ear that I was not alone, that everything I had experienced, every trial, every revelation, was leading me to this place of peace. The hardest part of the journey was never the visions or the encounters with the shadow. It wasn't even the spiritual battle or the isolation I faced. No, the hardest part was accepting that I could no longer live in two worlds. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't. I had to step into the unknown, and it meant embracing a truth that not everyone around me would understand. But now, as I look at Michael and Lila, I see the fruits of that decision. Our family isn't perfect. No family ever is. But we are stronger than we've ever been. Michael has stood by me through it all, his love unwavering, even when he didn't understand everything I was going through. And Lila, though young, has started to grasp the importance of faith in a way I could never have anticipated. I watch her pray with a sincerity that brings tears to my eyes, knowing that, despite everything we've been through, this journey has already begun to shape her as well. What's more, I've come to realize that this transformation was never just for me. It's for all of us, for the people I've met along the way, for the strangers I've yet to reach. I've learned that my experiences, the visions, the battles, the revelations, are not mine to keep hidden. They are a gift, and I am meant to share them, not out of obligation, but out of the deep, soul-deep knowing that there is something greater than us all, something that ties us together, something that holds us up when we feel like we're about to fall. And so here I am, ready to take the next step in this journey. The journey isn't over, not by a long shot. There will be more revelations, more struggles, more challenges to face. But I now know that I am equipped to face them. Not because of anything I have done, but because of the strength I've found in my faith. The prayer that once seemed like an empty ritual has become a lifeline. I've seen how it can move mountains, how it can change the course of reality itself. The world may not understand my transformation. They may never understand the depths of the spiritual truths I've encountered. But that's okay, because what matters now is not how the world sees me, but how I see myself, how I see God, how I see my family, and how I see the incredible potential for healing and redemption in all of us. I've learned that the journey isn't about arriving at some final destination. It's about staying on the path even when it gets difficult. It's about trusting that there's a purpose to the struggles, a reason for the pain, and most importantly, it's about knowing that there's always hope. No matter how dark it may get, there is always light. There is always grace. So, to anyone out there who feels like they're on the edge of their own spiritual awakening, I say this: keep going, keep praying, keep seeking. The truth may not always come when you expect it, and it may not always look the way you think it should. But if you open your heart, if you listen deeply, you will find it. And when you do, you'll realize that everything you thought you knew about life, about faith, and about yourself is just the beginning of something far more profound. And to all those who have been a part of this journey, those who have supported me, those who have challenged me, and those who have shared their own stories with me, I thank you. You've helped me grow in ways I never could have imagined, and together we will continue to grow. For we are all part of this incredible, ongoing story of faith, of transformation, and of love. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to reflect on your own spiritual journey. What truths have you uncovered along the way? What moments of faith have shaped you? I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're ready for more, subscribe to the channel for future episodes. And please, share this video with someone who might need a little inspiration or hope in their own journey. You never know whose life you might change by simply sharing a story. Thank you for being a part of this journey. And remember, no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, you are never truly alone.